She is a complete disgrace to this family and a manipulative thief who preyed on a dying woman. My mother screamed those words at the top of her lungs, her manicured finger trembling as she pointed across the polished oak tables of the probate courtroom. I did not blink. I did not flinch. I just sat there in my tailored suit while the judge slowly stood up, leaned over his heavy wooden bench, and asked her attorney a single question that made the color drain entirely from my mother's face. "Counselor, do you truly know who this woman is?" The attorney froze. My mother gasped, her eyes darting frantically around the room. The truth was about to shatter their entire reality. "My name is Kiara. I am 35 years old, and for my entire life, I have been the designated scapegoat of a family that values country club status over actual character." As I sat in the defendant's chair listening to them try to strip away the only thing my grandmother ever gave me, I realized the years of silent endurance were finally over. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe. If you have ever had to sit quietly while toxic family members tried to rewrite history to make you the villain, you will definitely want to hear how I systematically dismantled their lies. The courtroom was stifling, smelling of lemon floor wax and the overpowering designer cologne worn by my brother-in-law DeAndre. He sat at the plaintiff's table, looking incredibly smug, his custom-tailored suit straining against his shoulders. Next to him was my younger sister Jasmine. She was dabbing at completely dry eyes with a monogrammed tissue, playing the role of the heartbroken golden child to absolute perfection. And there was my mother Brenda, wearing her Sunday best, radiating righteous indignation while shooting me glares that could melt steel. They had brought in a high-priced, aggressive attorney named Mr. Prescott to destroy me on the public record. For the past 45 minutes, I had listened to this man pace back and forth across the courtroom carpet, painting me as a bitter, financially incompetent spinster who had somehow manipulated my grandmother Nana Pearl into signing over her entire $4 million estate to me just days before she passed away. "Your Honor," Mr. Prescott boomed, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls, "we are here today to right a grievous wrong. The respondent, Kiara, has been completely estranged from her loving family for years. She is a low-level bookkeeper with zero experience managing substantial wealth. Yet we are expected to believe that the late Pearl Washington, a woman of deep family values, intentionally bypassed her devoted daughter and her pregnant entrepreneurial granddaughter to leave her entire legacy to a woman who could not even be bothered to attend family milestones." I kept my hands folded neatly on the table in front of me, my expression utterly blank. It was taking every ounce of my professional restraint not to burst out laughing. Devoted daughter. Pregnant entrepreneurial granddaughter. The delusions were almost impressive. Mr. Prescott turned to glare at me, treating the judge and the gallery to a theatrical display of disgust. "This is a woman so consumed by jealousy and selfishness that she refused to contribute to her own sister's wedding. She abandoned her family. She is unfit, untrustworthy, and frankly, a disgrace to the very concept of family loyalty. My clients are simply asking the court to dissolve this fraudulent will and place the estate in the capable hands of DeAndre, an established business owner who can protect the family assets." As he spoke, my mind automatically began correcting the record, sorting the facts with the cold, calculated precision of the forensic auditor I actually was. Not the low-level bookkeeper they all assumed me to be, refused to contribute to her sister's wedding. That was how they framed it. What Mr. Prescott did not know, what the court did not know yet, was the reality of that situation. 3 years ago, Jasmine and DeAndre had demanded a lavish destination wedding in Tulum. They did not ask me to be a bridesmaid. They asked me to hand over $50,000 from my savings to cover the catering and the floral arrangements. When I calmly told them no, my mother called me crying, accusing me of ruining Jasmine's special day and punishing her because no man had chosen me yet. They felt entitled to my money because they assumed I had nowhere else to spend it. But they had absolutely no idea how hard I had fought for every single dollar in my accounts. As Mr. Prescott continued to drone on about my supposed financial incompetence, my chest tightened with the memory of my 19th birthday. While other girls my age were worrying about college exams and dorm parties, I was sitting in a bank manager's office discovering that my credit score was completely destroyed. My mother, the woman currently weeping for the judge, had stolen my social security number to take out a massive auto loan for a brand new Mercedes-Benz. When I confronted her about the crushing debt in my name, she had simply waved her hand and told me that I owed her for the roof over my head and the food in my stomach. She told me family helps family, and that I was being dramatically disrespectful for even bringing it up. It took me a decade of eating ramen noodles, working 3 jobs, and studying late into the night to dig myself out of the financial grave my mother had buried me in. I did not just fix my credit, I became obsessed with financial law, with tracing money, with uncovering fraud. I clawed my way into a top-tier wealth management firm and eventually became a lead forensic investigator. I built an empire in total silence while they mocked me for living in a modest apartment and driving a practical sedan. And now, here they were trying to steal from me again. I glanced over at DeAndre. He caught my eye and flashed a quick, arrogant smirk, fully believing he was winning. He believed his leased Porsche and his smooth-talking charisma were enough to convince the judge that he was a responsible guardian of Nana Pearl's wealth. He had no idea that I already had his complete financial footprint saved on a secure, encrypted drive inside my briefcase. I knew exactly how heavily leveraged he was. I knew about the secret gambling debts, the offshore accounts, and the desperate, bleeding state of his so-called logistics company. I looked at Jasmine, who was nodding emphatically at everything the lawyer said, holding her perfectly manicured hand over her slightly swollen belly. She genuinely believed that because she was the pretty, outgoing favorite, the universe owed her a multi-million-dollar inheritance. And then I looked at my mother. Brenda met my gaze, her eyes cold and hard. She mouthed the word selfish to me across the room. She was so confident in her ability to manipulate the narrative. She had spent my entire life gaslighting me, convincing our extended family that I was difficult, cold, and ungrateful. She thought this courtroom was just another Sunday dinner table where she could loudly proclaim her lies until everyone simply agreed with her. But a courtroom is not a dining room, and I was no longer the frightened 19-year-old girl crying over a stolen identity. Mr. Prescott finished his opening statement with a dramatic flourish, slamming a thick binder onto his table. Therefore, Your Honor, we request an immediate injunction against the respondent and demand that control of the estate be transferred to my clients, pending a full investigation into this blatant elder abuse. The courtroom fell dead silent. The air was thick with tension. My mother sat up straighter, adjusting her pearl necklace, looking expectantly at the judge. She was waiting for the gavel to fall in her favor. She was waiting for me to be publicly humiliated and stripped of my power. Instead, Honorable Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. He did not look at Mr. Prescott. He did not look at my mother or my sister. He looked down at a separate, unassuming manila envelope that my own attorney had quietly handed to the clerk before the session began. The judge opened the envelope. He read the first page, then he turned to the second. The silence stretched on, becoming heavy and suffocating. DeAndre shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The smug smile began to slip from his face. My mother cleared her throat, clearly unnerved by the lack of immediate validation. Finally, the judge looked up. His eyes locked onto my mother, and that was when she lost her temper, pointing at me and screaming that I was a disgrace. That was when she tried to use her loudest, most domineering voice to force the universe to bend to her will. But the judge did not bend. He simply stood up and asked the question that would begin the total demolition of their perfect, fraudulent lives. Mr. Prescott stood frozen at his podium. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He glanced back at my mother, who suddenly looked as though all the air had been sucked out of the room. The smug confidence that had radiated from her only moments ago vanished instantly. Judge Harrison did not wait for an incompetent lawyer to find his words. He simply picked up the heavy manila folder that my discreet legal counsel, Mr. Carter, had placed on his desk just before the hearing began. The judge looked down at the massive stack of forensic financial reports, bank records, and legal affidavits I had spent the last 48 hours compiling. He adjusted his glasses and looked back up at the courtroom. Due to the substantial and highly sensitive nature of this newly submitted documentation, the judge announced, his voice echoing loudly. I am calling an immediate 1-hour recess to review this file in my chambers. We will reconvene at precisely 2:00. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. The judge stood up and retreated through the private doors behind his bench, taking my explosive dossier with him. The courtroom immediately erupted into frantic whispers. Mr. Prescott hurriedly began shoving his neatly organized legal pads into his leather briefcase, his face flushed with confusion and sudden panic. DeAndre leaned over the divider, aggressively whispering into the lawyer's ear, demanding to know what was in the folder. Mr. Prescott just shook his head, looking completely out of his depth. But my mother could not handle the sudden shift in power. She thrived on control, on being the loudest voice in any room. The fact that the judge had dismissed her attorney and walked out without giving her the validation she craved was too much for her ego to bear. She stood up from her chair, smoothed down her expensive conservative dress, and marched straight over to the defendant's table where I was quietly packing my own notes. She planted both her hands firmly on the polished wood of my table, leaning into my personal space. Her heavy floral perfume washed over me, a scent that had instantly triggered my anxiety for the first 20 years of my life. But today it did nothing. I looked up at her, my face completely neutral. You think some fake documents are going to save you? She hissed, her voice dripping with venom, but kept low enough so the bailiff would not intervene. You have always been a deceitful, jealous little girl. You could not stand the fact that your grandmother loved Jasmine more. You could not stand that your sister has a real family and a real husband while you have nothing but a cold, empty apartment. Jasmine waddled over to join our mother, placing a protective hand over her pregnant belly. She looked down at me with an expression of exaggerated pity. Why are you doing this to my baby Kiara? She whimpered, making sure her voice carried just enough for the remaining gallery members to hear. We just want what Nana promised us. Why do you always have to make everything so difficult? DeAndre stepped up behind Jasmine, placing a heavy hand on her shoulder. He puffed out his chest, trying to project the image of a protective patriarch. You need to drop this right now, Kiara, he demanded, using his best authoritative tone. You heard your mother. Stop playing games. You are out of your league here. Just hand over the estate keys, and we might convince the judge not to hold you in contempt for wasting the court's time. I did not say a word. I did not defend myself. I did not raise my voice or try to explain the truth. I simply sat there and looked at them. For my entire childhood, I had reacted to their bait. Whenever my mother accused me of something I did not do, I would cry and scream and beg her to believe me. Whenever Jasmine played the victim, I would bend over backward to fix whatever problem she created just to keep the peace. They expected me to break down. They wanted me to cause a scene so they could point their fingers and prove to everyone that I was the unstable, hysterical woman they claimed I was. But absolute silence is the greatest weapon you can use against a narcissist. Silence acts as a mirror. When you refuse to react, they are forced to look at their own unhinged behavior, and it drives them absolutely crazy. I maintained steady, unblinking eye contact with my mother. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. The color began to rise in her cheeks. Her hands started to tremble against the table. The lack of supply, the lack of my emotional pain was starving her. Her jaw clenched tight. Cat got your tongue, she sneered, though her voice wavered slightly. You always were a coward when it came down to a real fight. Let her pout, Jasmine. Come on, we have already won anyway. That judge is just doing his due diligence. Mr. Carter? My attorney stepped forward and gently touched my arm, signaling that it was time for us to leave the table. He looked at my family with mild disgust. "If you are quite finished harassing my client," he said calmly, "we would like to step out." My mother scoffed loudly, turning on her heel. "You will be begging us for a handout by dinner time," she tossed back over her shoulder. I watched them walk out the heavy double doors into the bright hallway. Through the small glass windows, I could see them immediately shift their demeanor. My mother began laughing, patting DeAndre on the back. Jasmine pulled out her phone, probably updating her social media followers about her stressful day in court, fighting for her legacy. They were celebrating prematurely, entirely convinced that their lies were bulletproof. They genuinely believed that the recess was just a formality before the judge handed them the keys to a $4 million kingdom. Mr. Carter leaned down next to me. "Would you like to grab a coffee while we wait, Kiara?" he asked kindly. "You handled that beautifully." I shook my head, keeping my eyes on the empty space where my family had just stood. "No thank you, Mr. Carter. If you do not mind, I would prefer to just sit here for a moment." He nodded understandingly, picked up his briefcase, and quietly exited the courtroom, leaving me completely alone. The heavy doors clicked shut. The chaotic noise of the hallway was instantly cut off, leaving the courtroom in a profound, heavy silence. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning vents above me. I leaned back against the hard wooden bench and took a slow, deep breath. My heart was beating a steady, calm rhythm. There was no fear left in my body. All the years of anxiety, all the nights I spent wondering why I was never good enough for the woman who gave birth to me, had completely evaporated. I had grieved the loss of my family a long time ago. What I was looking at today were just strangers trying to rob me. I closed my eyes, letting the quiet of the room wash over me. To understand how we got to this brutal showdown, you have to understand that this war did not start today in this courtroom. It did not start when they filed the lawsuit. It started exactly 6 months ago. My mind traveled back to a crisp gray morning in November. It was the day we buried Nana Pearl. That was the day the masks finally slipped completely off their faces. That was the day I realized they were not just toxic, they were dangerous. And that was the day I made a silent promise to myself that I would burn their fraudulent empire to the ground. The air inside Mount Zion Baptist Church was heavy with the scent of lilies and floor polish. I stood near the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary, wearing a simple black dress completely invisible to the people who shared my DNA. Down at the front, in the very first row, the performance of the century was taking place. My mother Brenda was draped in black lace, wearing a wide-brimmed mourning hat that practically demanded its own zip code. She was wailing, real theatrical chest-heaving sobs that echoed perfectly off the vaulted ceilings. Every time the pastor paused, she would cry out, asking the Lord to give her strength, while a photographer she had specifically hired snapped pictures of her grief for her social media pages. Next to her sat Jasmine. She was wearing designer sunglasses indoors, dabbing at her face with a tissue, occasionally leaning her head onto DeAndre's shoulder, so he could play the role of the stoic, protective husband. He was nodding solemnly at the pastor, shaking hands with the deacons, passing out programs like he was running for mayor. I took a seat in the very last pew, slipping in quietly next to an elderly woman I did not know. Not a single family member had greeted me when I walked in. They did not save me a seat in the family section. They had not even included my name in the printed obituary under the surviving grandchildren. According to the glossy pamphlet in my hands, Nana Pearl was survived by her devoted daughter Brenda, her beloved granddaughter Jasmine, and her grandson, by marriage, DeAndre. I traced my thumb over the glossy paper, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The sheer audacity of their hypocrisy was almost breathtaking. For the last 3 years of her life, Nana Pearl did not live in her beautiful estate. Following a severe stroke, she had to be moved to a specialized memory care and rehabilitation facility. The cost was staggering. It was over $8,000 a month. When the social worker first handed my mother the financial breakdown, Brenda had immediately started crying, claiming she was on a fixed income, and was too emotionally fragile to handle the stress of a sick parent. Jasmine had conveniently just launched another failed business venture, claiming all her capital was tied up. So I stepped in. I paid the deposit. I paid the monthly fees. I bought her comfortable clothes, her favorite lotions, and the specific brand of peppermints she loved. I spent every Tuesday evening and Sunday afternoon sitting in that sterile facility, holding her frail hand, brushing her hair, and listening to her tell stories about growing up in Georgia. My mother visited twice a year, on Mother's Day and Christmas. She would stay for exactly 20 minutes, take a few selfies with Nana to post online with captions about the importance of family, and then leave complaining about the smell of the hospital. Jasmine only showed up when she needed a check to cover a missed car payment, playing the sweet, struggling granddaughter until Nana would sigh and ask me to hand over the cash. They treated the woman who built our family like an inconvenience. But as I sat in the back of the church watching them weep over her casket, I remembered exactly when I realized my family viewed both me and Nana as nothing more than an automated teller machine. It happened just 2 weeks before Nana passed. Her condition had rapidly deteriorated, and she was moved to palliative care. The room was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor and the soft hum of the oxygen machine. I was sitting beside her bed, holding her hand. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. The door swung open, and in walked DeAndre and Jasmine. It was the first time I had seen DeAndre in the hospital in over a year. He was wearing a sharp custom suit and carrying a leather portfolio. Jasmine stayed near the door, looking nervously at the medical equipment. DeAndre walked right up to the bed, barely glancing at Nana. He looked directly at me. "Kiara," he said, keeping his voice low, but completely devoid of warmth. "We need to talk business. Jasmine and I are expanding the logistics company. We secured a warehouse, but the bank is dragging their feet on the operating capital. I know you manage Nana's accounts now. We need $50,000 transferred by Friday. Consider it a business loan." I stared at him, completely paralyzed by the sheer disrespect. My grandmother was lying between us, struggling to take her next breath, and he was using her deathbed as a networking opportunity. I calmly told him no. I told him Nana's money was strictly for her care, not to fund his failing business ventures. DeAndre's face twisted in disgust. He leaned closer to me, his expensive cologne masking the smell of the hospital antiseptics. "You are just a selfish, bitter woman, Kiara. You sit on all this money while your own sister struggles. This is why nobody in this family likes you. You have absolutely no loyalty." He grabbed Jasmine by the arm and stormed out of the room, leaving the heavy wooden door wide open behind them. I sat there trembling with anger. Then I felt a weak squeeze on my hand. I looked down. Nana Pearl had her eyes open. They were cloudy, but the sharp intelligence that had always defined her was still there. She looked at the empty doorway, and then she looked at me. She did not have the strength to speak, but she did not need to. In that single silent look, she told me she understood exactly what they were. She saw the vultures circling, and she trusted me to protect the nest. Back in the church, the pastor called my mother up to the pulpit to deliver the eulogy. Brenda practically draped herself over the wooden podium. She spoke for 20 minutes about how Nana Pearl was her best friend, her guiding light, and how she had single-handedly cared for her mother in her final days. The congregation hummed in sympathy. People wiped their eyes. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I did not shed a single tear. I just watched them, because I knew exactly what they were waiting for. They were putting on this elaborate show for the community because they needed to maintain their image before the reading of the will. They were counting the days until they could unlock the gates to the estate and drain the accounts dry. They thought the funeral was the finish line. They thought they had successfully buried the only person who could hold them accountable, and that I would just quietly disappear back into my small apartment entirely out of their way. The service finally ended. The pallbearers wheeled the heavy casket down the center aisle. As they passed my row, Brenda locked eyes with me for a fraction of a second. There was no grief in her expression, only a cold, dismissive warning. A silent command to stay in my place. I let them walk out into the bright afternoon sun to receive their endless condolences. I slipped out a side door and drove myself to the cemetery, standing far away from their neatly arranged canopy under the trees. The real battle was not going to happen today in front of an audience. The real battle was brewing for the holidays. It was set for a few weeks later when the entire family would gather for Thanksgiving at Nana's empty estate. That was the day they planned to finally claim their prize. And that was the exact moment I decided I would no longer be their victim. The smell of roasted turkey and candied yams wafted up the grand staircase, wrapping the house in a false sense of warmth. Down in the formal dining room, the extended family was loudly celebrating Thanksgiving. Laughter echoed through the halls, glasses clinked, and music played from the patio speakers. It had only been 3 weeks since we buried Nana Pearl, but you would never know it from the festive atmosphere downstairs. They were not mourning. They were treating the holiday like a victory lap, completely comfortable in a house they believed was already theirs. I was far away from the noise, sitting alone in Nana Pearl's second-floor study. The room still smelled like her signature lavender perfume and old paper. The late afternoon autumn sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains, casting long shadows across her massive mahogany desk. I was methodically sorting through her filing cabinets, packing her sensitive personal documents, old journals, and actual financial ledgers into secure lockboxes. I wanted to make sure every piece of paper that held her personal history was safely removed before the house became a free-for-all. The heavy oak door of the study suddenly swung shut with a solid, echoing thud. I looked up from a stack of vintage photographs. My mother Brenda and my brother-in-law DeAndre stood inside the room. DeAndre reached behind him and turned the brass lock, sealing us in. He leaned his broad shoulders against the wood, crossing his arms over his chest, effectively blocking the only exit. My mother stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She was holding a glass of white wine, looking around the study with a proprietary gleam in her eye. She ran her free hand along the edge of a vintage bookshelf, already assessing what she could sell and what she wanted to keep for her own living room. "What are you doing in here, Kiara?" my mother asked, her voice carrying that familiar, condescending tone she always used when she was about to demand something from me. "You are missing the family prayer." "I am packing up Nana's personal items," I replied calmly, placing the photographs into a padded folder. I did not want them getting lost when the cleaning crews arrived next week. DeAndre pushed himself off the door and walked toward the desk. He was wearing a ridiculously tight designer sweater and a flashy watch that I knew for a fact was a cheap replica. He planted his hands on the opposite side of the mahogany desk, leaning his weight forward in a blatant attempt at physical intimidation. "Forget the old pictures," DeAndre said, his voice dropping into an artificial, authoritative register. "It is time we talk real business. We let you play secretary for the last few years because Nana was sick and someone needed to run her errands. But she is gone now. I am the man of the family, and it is my responsibility to step up and secure our assets." I stopped packing. I folded my hands on top of the desk and looked directly into his eyes. "Secure our assets." I repeated the phrase slowly, letting the absurdity of it hang in the quiet air of the study. "Exactly," he said, puffing out his chest. "Jasmine and I have been going over the long-term plans for the estate. You need to hand over the master keys to the main house, and I am going to need the administrative passwords to Nana's investment accounts, the offshore trust details, and the contact information for her primary broker. I need to consolidate the portfolio by Monday morning so we can start moving the capital into higher-yield investments. My logistics company is ready to scale, and this estate is going to provide the seed money." I just stared at him. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of this man was almost impressive. He was standing in a $4 million estate demanding the keys to an empire from the woman who actually controlled it all, while his own checking account was currently overdrawn by $600. I knew his exact financial standing. I knew he was drowning in high-interest loans, yet here he was demanding I hand over a fortune so he could gamble it away on a failing business venture. "No," I said quietly. DeAndre blinked clearly, not expecting a direct refusal. Excuse me. I said no, DeAndre. You are not getting the keys to this house. You are certainly not getting the passwords to the investment accounts. You are not a beneficiary, you are not the executor, and you have absolutely no legal right to demand anything from me. Now step away from the desk. DeAndre's face darkened. He opened his mouth to shout, but my mother stepped between us, holding up a hand to silence him. She took a sip of her wine and looked at me with an expression of deep, exaggerated pity. It was the exact same look she gave me when I was a teenager, and she wanted to make me feel small. Kiara, please stop being so difficult. Brenda sighed, shaking her head. This is exactly why it is so hard to love you. You always have to make everything a battle. You are just a bookkeeper. You punch numbers into a calculator for a living. You do not understand how real wealth management works, and you certainly do not understand real estate. She walked around the desk, standing right beside my chair, her heavy floral perfume invading my space. Jasmine is the one building a real legacy. My mother continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. She is married. She is pregnant with my first grandchild. She has a vision for her life. She needs this 6-bedroom house to raise her growing family. It is the perfect place for them. You live alone in a tiny apartment downtown. What on earth would you do with a house this size? It makes absolutely no sense for you to be holding on to property you cannot even maintain. The psychological warfare was textbook. First, diminish my intelligence. Next, elevate the golden child. Finally, demand that I sacrifice my own resources to fund their toxic lifestyle. For 20 years, this exact formula had worked. Whenever she told me I was not smart enough or good enough, I would surrender just to prove I was a cooperative, loving daughter. But not today. I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical detachment. Nana Pearl left her estate to the person she trusted, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. And she did not trust either of you. My mother's eyes flared with sudden rage. How dare you speak to me like that? She hissed, her fake sweet facade crumbling instantly. I am your mother. You owe me respect. You are going to sign over the primary residence to your sister, and you are going to transfer the liquid assets to DeAndre so he can manage them properly. If you do not, I will make sure the entire family knows exactly how selfish and greedy you really are. You will be completely cut off. DeAndre slammed his hand down hard on the mahogany desk, rattling the antique brass lamp. You heard her, Kiara. The free ride is over. Open that laptop right now and log into the brokerage accounts. We are not leaving this room until the transfer is initiated. He took another step around the desk, towering over me, trying to use his physical size to force my compliance. He thought I was cornered. He thought I was just a frightened, lonely woman who would crumble under the weight of their combined aggression. I slowly pushed my chair back from the desk. I did not break eye contact with DeAndre. I reached down to the floor beside my chair, where my heavy leather briefcase was resting against the mahogany panels. My fingers wrapped around the handle. I pulled it up onto my lap and popped the brass latches. They wanted to talk about real estate. They wanted to talk about the future of this property. It was finally time to show them exactly who they were dealing with and exactly who was in control of their future. The sharp click of the brass latches echoed loudly in the tense silence of the study. DeAndre leaned back slightly, a satisfied smirk spreading across his face. He actually thought he had won. He genuinely believed that his little display of physical intimidation had broken my spirit, and that I was about to pull out a laptop to blindly transfer millions of dollars into his incompetent hands. My mother let out a dramatic sigh of relief, crossing her arms and shaking her head, as if dealing with a stubborn toddler who had finally agreed to eat their vegetables. Before I could pull my hand out of the briefcase, a sharp knock rattled the heavy oak door. DeAndre had locked it, but the knocking persisted, loud and impatient. Annoyed by the interruption, DeAndre marched over and turned the brass deadbolt. Jasmine pushed her way into the room. She was holding a small plate of catered appetizers, looking thoroughly irritated. She glared at me, then turned to her husband. What is taking so long? she whined, shifting her weight. Everyone downstairs is asking where you are. Are we doing this or not? I want to announce the estate transfer before dessert, so my friends on social media can see the new house. We are doing it right now, baby, DeAndre said smoothly, waving a hand back toward me. Your sister was just about to log into the accounts. I stood up slowly from the leather executive chair. I did not pull a laptop from my briefcase. Instead, I pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. The heavy legal paper felt substantial in my hands. I smoothed down the front of my skirt, stepped around the massive mahogany desk, and walked directly toward the three of them. I held the envelope out to DeAndre. He took it, his brow furrowing in confusion. This is not a computer, he muttered. He ripped open the flap and pulled out the stapled documents inside. Jasmine leaned over his shoulder, her eyes scanning the bold black text printed at the very top of the first page. I watched their faces as the reality of the words registered. 30-day, notice to vacate. The smugness vanished from DeAndre's face, replaced instantly by absolute bewilderment. He looked up at me, the papers trembling slightly in his massive hands. What is this? He demanded, his voice cracking just a fraction. It is exactly what it says it is, I replied, my voice completely flat and devoid of emotion. It is a legally binding eviction notice. You and Jasmine have been living in Nana Pearl's 2,000-square-foot guest house for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. You have not paid a single dime in rent. You have not paid a fraction of the property taxes. You have not even paid your own water bill. I am formally ending your tenancy. The free ride is over. You have 30 days to pack your belongings and vacate my property. Jasmine dropped her plate of appetizers onto a side table. The porcelain clattered loudly against the wood. Are you completely out of your mind? She shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. I am pregnant. That guest house is my home. Nana said we could stay there as long as we needed to get our business off the ground. She promised me this estate. Nana allowed you to stay for 6 months, I corrected her, refusing to raise my voice to match her hysteria. You stretched that 6 months into 3 years by manipulating her declining health and refusing to leave. You treated her property like a free hotel, while you blew your money on leased luxury cars and designer bags. And since I am the sole legal owner of this entire estate, I am executing my right to reclaim the premises. If your belongings are not out by the 26th of December, I will have the county sheriff physically remove them. My mother gasped loudly, clutching the collar of her silk blouse. Kiara, she screamed, you are a monster. How can you do this to your own blood? Your sister is carrying a child. You are going to throw a pregnant woman out onto the street just weeks before Christmas. What is wrong with you? But DeAndre did not yell. He exploded. The thin veneer of the smooth-talking, educated businessman completely vanished, replaced by a raw, volatile rage. He threw the legal documents onto the floor, the papers scattering across the Persian rug. He lunged forward, stepping right into my personal space. He was 6'2" and built like a linebacker. He used his massive frame to back me up against the heavy edge of the mahogany desk. He was looming over me so closely I could feel the heat radiating off his body and smell the stale wine on his breath. You listen to me, you arrogant little nobody! DeAndre hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, guttural whisper. He pointed a thick finger right between my eyes. You are not throwing my wife out on the street. You are not touching our home. I will completely destroy you before I let you disrespect me and my family like this. You have no idea who you are messing with. You think a piece of paper is going to stop me from taking what is mine? Any normal person would have flinched. Any normal person would have stepped back, intimidated by a furious man of his size cornering them in a locked room. My mother and sister were watching, holding their breath, fully expecting me to burst into tears and apologize. They expected me to cower. I did not move a single millimeter. My heart rate did not even elevate. I looked up at his flushed, angry face, my expression as cold and unyielding as concrete. I know exactly who I am messing with, DeAndre. I whispered back, my voice so steady it seemed to unnerve him. I am messing with a man who has not filed a legitimate corporate tax return in 4 years. I am messing with a man whose luxury SUV is 2 months behind on payments. I am messing with a man who has absolutely zero equity to his name. You want to talk about destroying people? Take one more aggressive step toward me, and I will have you arrested for trespassing and assault before the turkey downstairs is even cold. DeAndre froze. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscles jumping in his cheeks. He realized in that exact moment that his physical intimidation tactics were entirely useless against me. I was not afraid of him. More importantly, my subtle mention of his tax returns and car payments had hit a massive nerve. A flicker of panic crossed his eyes. He did not know how I knew about his financial troubles, but the fact that I did paralyzed him entirely. Slowly, he took a half step back. Pick up the papers. DeAndre, I ordered smoothly, gesturing toward the floor. I suggest you go downstairs, finish your dinner, and start looking for moving companies, because if you think I am bluffing, you are welcome to test me. He stared at me with pure hatred, but the fight had momentarily been drained out of him. He bent down, snatched the papers off the rug, and shoved them into his pocket. He turned to Jasmine, grabbing her arm roughly. "We are leaving!" he barked. Jasmine looked frantically between her husband and her mother, completely confused by his sudden retreat. "But we cannot just leave. We have to make her sign the house over. I said we are leaving," DeAndre roared, pulling her toward the door. My mother shot me a look of absolute disgust. "You will pay for this, Kiara. God sees your wicked heart." She turned on her heel and followed them out of the study, slamming the heavy oak door behind her. I stood alone in the quiet room. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the adrenaline finally course through my veins. The initial skirmish was over and I had drawn first blood. I had successfully derailed their plan to quietly rob me and force them out into the open. But I knew the war was far from over. Cornered people always fight back. And unfortunately for them, I had severely underestimated how far they were willing to go to steal my grandmother's legacy. Because as they drove away from the estate that evening, Jasmine was already planning her counterattack. My momentary peace in the study lasted exactly 2 minutes. I had barely locked my briefcase when the sound of heavy footsteps stomped back up the grand staircase. The heavy oak door flew open, hitting the wall with a loud bang. Jasmine shoved her way back inside, her face flushed red with absolute fury. DeAndre was right behind her, looking stressed, while my mother marched in with her head held high, looking like a general returning to the battlefield with a lethal new weapon. Jasmine marched straight up to the mahogany desk. She was breathing heavily, her hands shaking as she reached into her expensive leather maternity bag. "You really thought you had me figured out, Kiara?" She spat, her voice shrill and triumphant. "You thought you could just wave a piece of paper in my face and throw my unborn child out into the cold?" She pulled out a thickly folded document and slammed it down onto the center of the desk. She smoothed it out with the palm of her hand, tapping her acrylic nail aggressively against the bottom corner. "Read it and weep," she sneered. I did not flinch. I slowly lowered my eyes to the document. It was a standard pre-printed quitclaim deed, the kind you can download off the internet for free, but it was the writing on it that was meant to be my execution. According to this hastily filled-out form, Nana Pearl had transferred the absolute title of the entire $4 million estate directly to Jasmine. The date written next to my grandmother's supposed signature was November 2nd, exactly 3 days before she passed away, 3 days before she slipped into her final coma. My mother stepped forward, her posture radiating arrogant victory. She placed a comforting hand on Jasmine's shoulder, acting as the protective matriarch. "You really thought Nana was going to leave her legacy to a bitter, lonely woman who cares more about spreadsheets than her own blood?" my mother asked, her tone dripping with toxic sweetness. She leaned across the desk, making sure her words pierced as deeply as possible. "Nana always favored Jasmine. We all knew it. Jasmine is warm, she is loving, and she is actually building a family. Nana knew you were too cold to keep this family together. She knew you would try to steal what rightfully belonged to your sister. That is why she secretly had Jasmine bring this deed to the hospital. She wanted to protect her true heir from your greed. The gaslighting was so intense it was almost suffocating. My mother was rewriting history right in front of my face. She was taking the countless hours I had spent feeding Nana, bathing her, and managing her care and erasing them entirely. In her twisted narrative, I was the villainous spinster trying to rob the pregnant golden child. She wanted me to feel unloved. She wanted me to believe that my grandmother, the only person who ever truly saw me, had betrayed me at the very end. Years ago, hearing my mother say those words would have broken me. I would have crumbled onto the floor sobbing, begging to know why I was never enough. I would have questioned my own sanity and memories. But as I stood there listening to her venom, I felt absolutely nothing but a deep, clinical pity. This makes your little eviction notice completely void. DeAndre chimed in, finding his courage now that he thought they had the upper hand. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. You do not own this property, Jasmine does, which means you are currently standing in my house threatening my wife. My mother pulled her cell phone out of her designer purse and held it up, her thumb hovering over the screen. You have exactly 5 minutes to pack up your little briefcase and walk out the front door, Kiara. She issued the ultimatum with absolute authority. If you are not off this property immediately, I am calling the police. I will tell them you are a disgruntled relative trespassing on my daughter's property, and I will have you arrested for elder financial abuse. She smiled, a cold, calculating curve of her lips. Imagine how that will look to your fancy corporate bosses. A lead accountant dragged out of her grandmother's house in handcuffs for trying to steal from a pregnant woman. Your career will be over by Monday morning. Now get out of our house. The room fell dead silent. They stood in a united front, waiting for my collapse. They expected me to panic. They expected me to look at the deed, realize I had been outsmarted, and run away in shame. I looked down at the document again. To an untrained eye, it looked terrifyingly legitimate. It had a legal description of the property, a signature that somewhat resembled Nana Pearl's shaky handwriting, and a bright blue notary stamp making it officially binding. But I did not have an untrained eye. I was a top-tier forensic auditor. My entire career was built on dismantling financial illusions and spotting the microscopic flaws that criminals leave behind. I did not pack my briefcase. I did not walk toward the door. I simply picked up the quitclaim deed and held it up to the light of the desk lamp. I scrutinized the ink. I examined the pressure of the pen strokes. And then my eyes landed on the bright blue notary stamp located at the bottom right corner of the page. I felt a slow, razor-sharp smile pull at the corners of my mouth. They had made a catastrophic mistake. What are you smiling at, you psycho? Jasmine snapped, her triumphant demeanor faltering slightly at my lack of fear. I said, get out. I slowly lowered the paper and looked directly at my sister. The sheer stupidity of their plan was almost insulting. They had grown so accustomed to treating me like a naive, obedient punching bag that they had not even bothered to cover their tracks properly. They were playing checkers, while I had been playing three-dimensional chess for the last 10 years. They thought this forged piece of paper was their golden ticket to a $4 million empire. They had no idea that they had just handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle their entire lives. I kept my face perfectly still, masking the surge of vindication that rushed through my veins. I looked closer at the bright blue ink stamped at the bottom of the page. The notary seal belonged to a man named Darnell Jenkins. I recognized that name instantly. Darnell was one of DeAndre's fraternity brothers from college. I had met him exactly twice at family barbecues, and both times he was aggressively pitching some borderline illegal cryptocurrency scheme to anyone who would listen. He was not a respected legal professional. He was a guy who operated a sketchy tax prep kiosk out of a strip mall for 3 months out of the year. The fact that DeAndre used his shady buddy to forge a legal document transferring a $4 million estate was almost laughable. It was incredibly sloppy. I traced my finger over the signature line. Nana Pearl had suffered from severe arthritis in her right hand during the last 2 years of her life. Her real signature was a fragile, jagged scrawl that barely stayed on the line. The signature on this quitclaim deed was smooth, forceful, and perfectly fluid. It was a complete fake, most likely traced by Jasmine using an old birthday card as a reference. But I did not say any of that out loud. I did not point out the fraudulent notary stamp or the mismatched handwriting. If I revealed my hand right now, they would panic. They might destroy the document and try to find a smarter, more covert way to steal the estate. I needed them to feel confident. I needed them to submit this exact piece of paper to the county clerk's office. I needed them to commit a fully documented federal felony on the public record. My silence only fueled their arrogance. My mother, taking my lack of response as a sign of absolute defeat, crossed her arms and let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Look at you," my mother sneered, her voice echoing loudly in the quiet study. "You are staring at that paper like you actually know what it means. You are just a glorified bookkeeper, Kiara. You crunch numbers for middle-class people who want to save for a summer vacation. Do not stand there and try to read complex legal documents like you are some highly paid corporate lawyer. Leave the estate management to the professionals. Jasmine and DeAndre actually know what they are doing." Jasmine chimed in, snatching the deed right out of my hands. She carefully folded it and slid it back into her designer maternity bag like it was a winning lottery ticket. "You heard her," Kiara, Jasmine said, tossing her hair over her shoulder with a triumphant smirk. "This house is mine now. You have overstayed your welcome. Take your little briefcase and go back to your sad, empty apartment. And do not bother coming back for Christmas. This is a family home now, and you are clearly not acting like family." DeAndre stepped forward, puffing out his chest again, fully emboldened now that his wife was holding the forged weapon. "I am going to have the locks changed by tomorrow morning," he announced, pointing a thick finger toward the heavy oak door. "If I see your car in the driveway again, I will have it towed at your expense. Get out." I looked at the three of them. They were practically vibrating with malicious joy. They had finally done it. They had finally put the ungrateful, difficult daughter back in her place. They had secured their unearned wealth and guaranteed their luxurious future. They looked at me like I was a peasant who had just been banished from the castle. "Okay," I said quietly. My voice was calm, submissive, perfectly masking the absolute destruction I was about to rain down upon them. "If that is what the document says, then I suppose there is nothing left for me to do here today." My mother looked slightly taken aback by my sudden compliance, but her massive ego quickly smoothed over her suspicion. "Exactly," she said, gesturing grandly toward the hallway. "Now please leave so we can finish celebrating Thanksgiving in peace without your negative energy ruining the holiday." I turned around, picked up my heavy leather briefcase from the floor, and walked out of the study. I did not look back. As I walked down the grand staircase, I could hear their muffled laughter echoing from behind the closed doors. They were celebrating. They were probably already planning how to spend the money, remodel the kitchen, and buy new cars. I walked out the heavy front doors and stepped into the crisp November air. The sun had completely set, and the massive estate was bathed in the soft glow of the exterior security lights. I walked down the long brick driveway toward my car, the cold wind biting at my face. My mind was already racing, calculating the exact legal steps I needed to take. I needed to call my attorney first thing in the morning. I needed to freeze the physical property deed at the county level before DeAndre could try to leverage it for a cash loan. I was already mapping out a masterclass in financial retaliation. I unlocked my car, tossed my briefcase onto the passenger seat, and slid behind the steering wheel. I let out a long, shaky breath, allowing the adrenaline to finally course through my body. The physical confrontation was over. Now the real game was about to begin. I reached for the ignition. Before my fingers could turn the key, the silence of the car was shattered by a loud, piercing alarm. It was not a car alarm. It was my cell phone. I pulled the phone out of my coat pocket. The screen was flashing bright red. It was a high-priority alert from the secure banking application I used to monitor Nana Pearl's most protected assets. This was not a standard notification for a cleared check or a scheduled bill payment. This was a Level 1 security breach warning. I quickly unlocked the screen and opened the encrypted application. The notification text was stark and terrifying. An unauthorized user was currently attempting to bypass the secondary firewall on Nana Pearl's offshore trust account. Someone was actively trying to execute a massive wire transfer. They were trying to move $1.2 million in liquid cash to an external unrecognized bank account located in the Cayman Islands. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, my blood running cold. The quitclaim deed was just a distraction. It was a shiny object meant to keep me occupied with real estate disputes while the real theft happened behind my back. DeAndre was not just trying to steal a house. He was actively draining the lifeblood of the estate. He had somehow gotten his hands on the primary routing numbers, likely snooping through Nana's mail at the care facility before she died, and he was trying to clean out the vault before I could lock him out completely. My thumb hovered over the screen. The banking system was asking me to verify the transaction or flag it as fraudulent. I had less than 60 seconds before the automated system might push the transfer through to a pending status. DeAndre was sitting inside that house right now, probably tapping away on his laptop, thinking he was an absolute genius. He had no idea that every single financial move he made passed directly through my private server first. I hit the button to flag the transaction as highly fraudulent. Then I initiated a total account lockdown. With 3 quick taps, I froze every single cent of Nana Pearl's liquid assets across all global institutions. Nobody was getting anything in or out without my physical signature and a biometric scan. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the audacity of the attempt sent a fresh wave of pure anger washing over me. They were not just greedy, they were desperate. $1.2 million was an oddly specific number. DeAndre was in far deeper trouble than I had originally calculated. I started the car engine, watching the headlights sweep across the manicured lawn of the estate. The battle lines were officially drawn. DeAndre had just crossed a massive line from a civil family dispute into federal wire fraud. He wanted to play the role of the ruthless businessman. I was going to show him what a real financial predator looked like. But before I could take him down in court, I had to deal with the absolute nightmare my mother was about to unleash upon our extended family. Because when DeAndre realized the money was locked, they were going to start a public war to force my hand. I drove back to my apartment that night feeling a strange mix of adrenaline and profound exhaustion. I could perfectly picture the exact moment DeAndre hit enter on his keyboard, fully expecting to see $1.2 million route to his untraceable account, only to be met with a glaring red error screen. I knew the exact second panic set in. I knew the exact conversation he had with my mother and Jasmine when he realized the accounts were not just password protected, but entirely locked down under my biometric security clearance. The silence from their camp lasted exactly 36 hours. They were scrambling. They had the forged quitclaim deed for the house, but a massive house is not liquid cash. You cannot pay off immediate gambling debts and angry creditors with a piece of paper. DeAndre needed hard currency, and I had just bolted the vault shut. When they realized they could not outsmart me digitally or intimidate me physically, my mother resorted to her favorite, most destructive weapon. She deployed the flying monkeys. For those who have never survived a highly toxic family dynamic, flying monkeys are the enablers. They are the extended relatives, the family friends, and the church members who blindly believe the manipulator's lies and do their dirty work. They are the soldiers sent out to shame the scapegoat back into compliance. By Tuesday morning, my phone was practically melting down. I woke up to 47 unread text messages and 14 angry voicemails. My mother had clearly spent the entire weekend crying on the phone to every aunt, uncle, and cousin in our family tree. The narrative she spun was a masterpiece of victimhood. According to Brenda, I had shown up at Thanksgiving dinner completely unprovoked, screamed at my pregnant sister, and threatened to throw her out into the cold out of pure jealousy. But worse, she claimed I had somehow maliciously hacked into Nana Pearl's accounts and frozen the money that Nana had supposedly designated for Jasmine's baby. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, calmly listening to the voicemails. My cousin Tyrone left a 2-minute message calling me a corporate snake and a traitor to my own blood. My uncle Reggie sent a massive paragraph accusing me of forgetting where I came from just because I had a fancy degree. I even read a text from Deacon Thomas at their church quoting scripture about honoring thy mother and warning me about the fires of hell if I did not repent and surrender the money. They were trying to isolate me. They were hoping the collective weight of family shame would crush my spirit and force me to cave. I did not block their numbers. I did not respond with angry paragraphs defending my character. As a forensic auditor, I know that every angry voicemail, every threatening text message, and every slanderous email is just easily preserved evidence. I let them dig their own graves. I simply forwarded every single message to my secure server and backed it all up for my attorney. By Thursday, the harassment had reached a fever pitch. I needed a moment of absolute peace before heading into my downtown office for a massive client meeting. I stopped at an upscale coffee shop I frequented on the corner of Elm and Maple. It was a quiet place with exposed brick jazz music playing softly in the background and a clientele mostly made up of corporate lawyers and executives. It was my sanctuary. I stood at the counter, paid for my iced Americano, and took a deep breath of the roasted coffee beans. For a split second, my life felt normal. Then a sharp, booming voice cut through the low murmur of the cafe. "Well, if it is not the devil herself." I froze. I did not even have to turn around to know who it was. The heavy scent of gardenia perfume and peppermint candies hit my senses a second before Auntie Denise marched right into my personal space. Denise was my mother's older sister. She was a formidable, highly opinionated woman who sat on the usher board of their church and treated the family hierarchy like a strict military chain of command. She thrived on gossip, moral superiority, and being the loudest voice in any room. And right now she had a captive audience. Auntie Denise planted herself right between me and the glass exit doors, crossing her arms tightly over her brightly colored trench coat. Several patrons in tailored suits paused their conversations, looking over their laptops to watch the drama unfold. "You have a lot of nerve showing your face in public," Kiara, Denise announced, making sure her voice carried across the room so the barista and the other customers could hear. "After what you are doing to your own mother. After you tried to throw a pregnant woman out of her home just before the holidays. You are a cold, wicked girl." I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling the ice hit the back of my throat. I did not shrink down. I did not look around to see who was watching. I maintained perfect eye contact with her. "Please keep your voice down." "Auntie Denise," I said evenly, keeping my tone strictly professional. "This is not the place for family drama. You are making a scene." "Oh, I am making a scene," Denise barked, taking a step closer, completely invading my personal bubble. "You think you can steal your grandmother's legacy and nobody is going to say a single word to you? You think you can just freeze Jasmine's money because you are miserable and alone?" Brenda called me in tears. "She told me how you are holding those bank accounts hostage. She told me Jasmine has the real property deed signed by Nana herself, and you are still trying to steal that house out from under her." She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest, her eyes wide with righteous fury. "Your mother gave you life. She sacrificed everything to raise you, and this is how you repay her. You need to march back to that house, apologize to your sister, and unlock those accounts today. If you do not do the right thing for your pregnant sister, I will personally make sure you are dead to this entire family. Nobody will invite you to a single wedding, funeral, or barbecue. You will be entirely alone in this world. Do you hear me?" The coffee shop was entirely silent now. Every eye was on me. Auntie Denise stood there, breathing heavily, looking triumphant. She expected me to crumble. She expected the public embarrassment to break my resolve. The threat of complete exile is usually the ultimate weapon in a toxic family system. They rely on your deep-rooted fear of abandonment to keep you compliant. But Auntie Denise did not understand that I had stopped fearing their abandonment years ago. In fact, I welcomed it. I looked at her furious, self-righteous expression. She was so completely convinced of her own moral high ground. She genuinely believed she was defending a grieving mother and a helpless pregnant woman from a greedy, heartless monster. She did not know that Brenda had completely lied to her. Denise was fighting a public war on behalf of a woman who had been robbing her blind for years. I lowered my coffee cup. I did not yell back. I did not beg her to lower her voice. I realized that if I walked away now, the smear campaign would only continue to grow. I needed to cut the head off the snake. I needed to flip the most vocal flying monkey in the family, and I needed to do it right now. I reached into my designer tote bag, feeling the cool metal edge of my work tablet. I pulled it out and tapped the screen to wake it up. It was time to pull the curtain back. It was time to show Auntie Denise exactly who she was going to bat for and exactly how much of a fool my mother had made of her. I set the tablet down on the small cafe table between us. I tapped open a high-resolution PDF file and turned the screen so it was facing Auntie Denise perfectly. Take a close look at this, Auntie Denise. Read the dates and the transaction amounts, I said, keeping my voice calm and perfectly steady. Denise narrowed her eyes, scoffing loudly, as if the screen was somehow going to infect her. I do not want to look at your fake spreadsheets, Kiara. You cannot confuse me with numbers. It is not a spreadsheet, I replied. It is a certified bank ledger from 5 years ago, specifically the month of August. Do you remember what happened that August? Denise hesitated, her aggressive posture stiffening. That was when your mother almost lost her house because you drained her savings account. That was when I had to step in and give my own sister $20,000 from my retirement fund just so she would not end up on the street. Money she is still struggling to pay back because of you. I nodded slowly. That is the story she told you. Now look at the screen and see where your retirement money actually went. Reluctantly, Denise looked down. The bright screen illuminated her face. I had highlighted 3 specific lines in yellow. She pulled her reading glasses from the collar of her blouse and slid them onto her nose. On August 12th, $20,000 was wire transferred from your account into my mother's primary checking account. I narrated quietly, watching her eyes track across the page. Now look at the very next line. On August 14th, exactly 48 hours later, $18,000 was wired from that exact same checking account directly to Royal Caribbean International. The remaining $2,000 was spent at a high-end luggage boutique and a luxury spa in Miami. Auntie Denise stopped breathing. The loud, righteous indignation that had filled her chest just moments ago vanished into thin air. She took her glasses off, wiped them on her sleeve, and put them back on, leaning closer to the screen, as if the numbers might magically rearrange themselves into a different truth. My mother did not use your money to save her house, Auntie Denise. I continued, my voice gentle but relentlessly firm. She used your retirement fund to take Jasmine and DeAndre on a 2-week luxury cruise through the Bahamas. They posted hundreds of pictures online. Do you remember? They told everyone DeAndre won the tickets in a corporate raffle. They lied to you. And my mother has spent the last 5 years blaming me for a financial crisis that never existed, just so she would not have to pay you back. The silence in the coffee shop was profound. The few patrons who were watching had completely stopped pretending to work. They were glued to the absolute destruction of Auntie Denise's entire reality. Her face cycled through a rapid succession of emotions: confusion, denial, shock, and finally a deep, radiating fury. Her hands began to tremble, but this time it was not out of anger toward me. It was the realization that she had been played for an absolute fool by her own flesh and blood. She had spent 5 years defending a woman who had robbed her blind. "Where did you get this?" Denise whispered, her voice barely a fraction of the booming volume she had used a minute ago. "I am a forensic auditor," I replied simply. "I track missing millions for a living. Finding a stolen $20,000 was a lunch break project. I have the entire paper trail. I have the cruise itineraries, the boutique receipts, and the bank statements. I can email the entire file to you right now." Auntie Denise slowly stood up straight. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time in my adult life. The protective, enabling fog my mother had cast over the family was instantly shattered. Denise reached into her purse, pulled out a $20 bill, and slapped it down on the counter next to my coffee. "Have a nice day at work, Kiara," she said, her voice tight and completely hollow. She turned around and marched toward the glass doors of the cafe. She did not yell. She did not make a scene. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed a number, her thumb jabbing the screen with enough force to crack the glass. I could faintly hear her voice as she pushed through the doors into the street. "Brenda, you lying thief! Pick up the phone right now." I slid my tablet back into my tote bag, picked up my iced Americano, and took a long sip. The coffee tasted exceptionally good that morning. By noon, the entire family dynamic had imploded. Auntie Denise did not just confront my mother privately. She took the entire dossier of evidence I emailed her and dropped it directly into the massive family group text message. She exposed Brenda to every single aunt, uncle, cousin, and church elder who possessed a smartphone. The backlash was instantaneous and brutal. My mother's carefully curated image as the long-suffering victim was incinerated in a matter of minutes. The flying monkeys completely stopped flying. They turned right around and attacked their commander. But exposing my mother's lies did not end the war. It only made my enemies desperate. And desperate people make massive, catastrophic mistakes. When the smear campaign failed, DeAndre and Jasmine realized they were entirely out of options. The family was not going to pressure me into handing over the estate keys. The bank accounts were frozen solid. DeAndre was drowning in debt, and his creditors were calling. They needed a weapon that did not rely on public opinion. They needed legal authority. Exactly 2 days after the coffee shop incident, I was sitting in my corner office reviewing a corporate tax file when the receptionist buzzed my desk. She told me there was a courier waiting for me in the lobby. I walked out to find a man holding a thick stack of legal documents. He asked for my name, handed me the papers, and walked away. I looked down at the bold print on the front page. They had taken the nuclear option. Jasmine and DeAndre, alongside my mother, had officially filed a motion in the county probate court for an emergency conservatorship over Nana Pearl's estate. They were dragging me to court. I walked back into my office, shut the glass door, and spread the documents out across my desk. The sheer audacity of the claims made me laugh out loud. They had hired an aggressive, expensive attorney named Mr. Prescott to draft the motion. According to these papers, they were officially accusing me of elder financial abuse, fraud, and gross incompetence. They claimed I was mentally unstable, deeply estranged from the family, and that I had used my position as a bookkeeper to manipulate an ailing woman into signing away her legacy. They were demanding the court strip me of my executor status and hand total control of the estate over to DeAndre. They had included the forged quitclaim deed as Exhibit A. It was a breathtaking gamble. They were so desperate for the money that they were willing to commit perjury and submit fraudulent documents to a sitting judge. They thought the threat of a massive legal battle would finally be the thing that broke me. They assumed I would take one look at the expensive law firm's letterhead and surrender the estate just to avoid the legal fees and the public humiliation of a trial. They did not know that by filing this motion they had stepped directly into my territory. They thought they were dragging me into a fight I could not win. In reality, they had just handed me the legal jurisdiction to absolutely destroy them on the public record. My lawyer, Mr. Carter, called me 20 minutes later. He had received his copy of the motion. "Kiara," he said, his voice laced with professional concern. "They are asking for an expedited hearing. They want to depose you by next week to get your testimony on the record before we go before the judge. They are going to try to rattle you." "Let them try," I replied, leaning back in my office chair, looking out at the city skyline. "Schedule the deposition. In fact, tell Mr. Prescott we are happy to comply with their expedited timeline. Let DeAndre get on the record. Oh, let him testify under oath about his brilliant financial mind." I spent the entire weekend preparing. I did not prepare a defense. I prepared an execution. Because when you drag a forensic auditor into a legal deposition, You better make sure your own closet is completely empty. And DeAndre's closet was overflowing with financial skeletons that were about to tear his marriage and his freedom completely apart. The conference room at Prescott and Associates was specifically designed to intimidate. It was located on the 42nd floor of a sleek downtown skyscraper, featuring floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a massive polished mahogany table, and high-backed leather chairs that made you feel small the moment you sat down. I walked in with my attorney, Mr. Carter, precisely at 9 in the morning. My mother, Jasmine, and DeAndre were already seated on the opposite side of the table. They looked like they had just walked out of a catalog for wealthy, successful families. DeAndre was wearing a dark navy suit with a silk tie. Jasmine had dressed in a tailored maternity dress that screamed old money, and my mother was draped in a cashmere shawl, sipping sparkling water with an air of absolute royalty. They looked incredibly smug. They genuinely believed this deposition was going to be my execution. At the head of the table sat Mr. Prescott. He had his legal pads perfectly aligned and his expensive fountain pen ready. Next to him, a court reporter was setting up her stenography machine, her fingers hovering over the keys. "We are on the record," Mr. Prescott announced, his voice booming in the quiet room. "This is the deposition of Kiara regarding the emergency conservatorship motion for the estate of the late Pearl Washington." Mr. Prescott immediately went on the offensive. He did not ask questions to gather facts. He asked questions designed to paint a very specific, humiliating picture of me for the court transcript. My mother had clearly fed him every insecurity and every false narrative she had spent my entire life cultivating. "You currently reside in a one-bedroom rental apartment." "Correct," Mr. Prescott asked, peering at me over the rim of his glasses. "Yes," I answered calmly. "And you are currently unmarried. You have no children. You have no dependents of any kind." "That is correct." Mr. Prescott paced slightly in his chair. "So, just to clarify for the record, you are a 35-year-old single woman living in a modest rental property while your younger sister is married, expecting her first child, and building a family. Would you say this dynamic has caused you to harbor feelings of jealousy toward Jasmine?" "Objection, relevance," Mr. Carter interjected smoothly, not even looking up from his notepad. "My client's personal feelings are not on trial here. I will rephrase." Mr. Prescott sneered. "Is it true that your job title is simply bookkeeper? That you spend your days doing basic data entry for a flat hourly wage?" I looked at Mr. Carter. He gave me a microscopic nod, signaling me to stick to the plan. We were not going to reveal my actual credentials yet. We needed them to fully commit to their lies on the record first. "I work in the financial accounting sector," I replied neutrally. Mr. Prescott chuckled condescendingly. "Data entry. I see. And yet, with your limited financial literacy and your lack of personal assets, you somehow managed to convince your ailing grandmother to grant you sole executive control over a $4 million portfolio. A portfolio you are completely unqualified to manage. Did you isolate her from her loving daughter and granddaughter to achieve this?" I simply answered no. For the next 2 hours, Mr. Prescott battered me with insulting, degrading questions. He brought up my refusal to pay for Jasmine's wedding, framing it as financial cruelty. He brought up the forged quitclaim deed, treating it as an absolute, irrefutable legal document, and asked why I was aggressively defying my grandmother's final wishes. Through it all, I gave them absolutely nothing. I answered with simple yes or no statements. I did not raise my voice. I did not get defensive. I did not cry. My lack of emotional reaction was visibly infuriating my mother. She kept whispering angrily to Jasmine, clearly annoyed that I was not breaking down under the pressure. Finally, Mr. Prescott shifted his strategy. If he could not make me look crazy, he was going to make DeAndre look like the savior of the estate. I would like to pivot and establish my client's fitness to assume the role of conservator, Mr. Prescott announced. "DeAndre, please state your current occupation for the record." DeAndre sat up perfectly straight, adjusting his silk tie. He practically glowed with self-importance. I am the founder and chief executive officer of a rapidly expanding regional logistics and freight management company. And how would you describe your business acumen? Mr. Prescott asked, serving up a softball question. DeAndre leaned into the microphone. I manage complex supply chains, fleet logistics, and high-level corporate accounts. My gross revenue projections for the next fiscal year are off the charts. I deal with high-yield investments and capital allocation every single day. I have the extensive financial literacy required to manage a substantial real estate portfolio and liquid assets. I am equipped to protect Nana Pearl's legacy and grow it for the next generation. Unlike certain people who just balance checkbooks for a living, he shot a venomous, triumphant glare across the table at me. Jasmine beamed with pride, resting her hand on his arm. My mother nodded along, completely buying into the illusion of his success. DeAndre continued his monologue, testifying, under penalty of perjury, about his massive corporate success, his pristine credit, and his brilliant financial mind. He painted himself as a titan of industry. He claimed his company was entirely debt-free and wildly profitable. Every single word out of his mouth was an easily disprovable lie, and he was enthusiastically stating it all on a sworn legal record. "Thank you, DeAndre," Mr. Prescott said, looking incredibly satisfied. "I believe that clearly establishes who is actually fit to manage this estate. Counsel, do you have any questions for my client?" Mr. Carter slowly closed his leather portfolio. He looked at me. I gave him a subtle blink of approval. The trap was ready. Just a few minor clarifying questions for Mr. DeAndre regarding his financial fitness, Mr. Carter said pleasantly. His tone was polite, almost deferential, which only inflated DeAndre's ego even further. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "Go ahead. Ask me anything you want." Mr. Carter folded his hands on the table. "You stated under oath that your logistics company is highly profitable and entirely debt-free. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," DeAndre replied without missing a beat. "And you have no outstanding personal or corporate debts that would compromise your fiduciary duties to this estate. No massive liabilities, no creditors threatening legal action." DeAndre scoffed, looking offended. "None at all. My finances are spotless." Mr. Carter nodded slowly, letting the silence hang in the room for just a moment. He picked up a single sheet of paper from his folder. "Are you familiar with a private equity and debt management firm called Apex Holdings?" Mr. Carter asked quietly. The shift in the room was instantaneous and violent. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. The arrogant swagger completely vanished from DeAndre's posture. His arms uncrossed. He suddenly gripped the edge of the mahogany table. All the blood drained from his face, leaving his skin a pale ashen color. He stopped breathing. Apex Holdings was the massive corporate entity that had recently bought out the high-interest predatory commercial loans DeAndre had taken out to fund his failing business and his secret gambling habits. He owed them over $500,000. He was 3 months behind on payments, and they had just sent him a final notice of default. What he absolutely did not know was that Apex Holdings was a subsidiary portfolio secretly managed and operated by me. I literally owned his debt. I was his biggest creditor. Mr. Prescott noticed his client's sudden paralysis. DeAndre, the lawyer, prompted nervously. "Did you hear the question?" DeAndre swallowed hard. A bead of sweat formed at his temple. He looked at Mr. Carter, then his eyes darted over to me. I was sitting perfectly still, looking right back at him, with a cold, knowing smile. In that exact fraction of a second, DeAndre realized he was walking into a minefield, but he had no idea where the mines were buried. He had just bragged under oath about being debt-free. If he admitted he knew Apex Holdings, he would have to explain why a debt collection firm was hunting him down, completely destroying his case for the conservatorship. He felt cornered, so he did what cornered liars always do. He doubled down. "No," DeAndre croaked, his voice suddenly sounding like gravel. "I do not know them. I am not familiar with that company." Mr. Carter raised an eyebrow, his voice dropping an octave. "Let me remind you that you are under oath, DeAndre. Perjury is a felony offense. I will ask you one more time. You have absolutely no business dealings, no outstanding commercial loans, and no defaulted contracts with Apex Holdings. Jasmine looked at her husband, her brow furrowed in confusion. DeAndre, what is he talking about? She whispered. Nothing. DeAndre snapped at her, his voice tight with panic. He turned back to the court reporter, his chest heaving slightly. No, I have no dealings with them. I have never heard of them in my life. Mr. Carter smiled gently. He did not press the issue. He did not pull out the loan documents and expose the lie right then and there. He simply looked at the court reporter. Thank you, DeAndre. I have no further questions at this time. Mr. Prescott quickly ended the deposition, looking deeply unsettled by the sudden change in his client's demeanor. As they packed up their briefcases, DeAndre would not make eye contact with anyone. He practically sprinted out of the conference room, leaving Jasmine and my mother scrambling to catch up with him. I sat back in my leather chair listening to the heavy glass doors swing shut behind them. The deposition was over, and it was a spectacular success. DeAndre had just committed textbook undeniable perjury on a sworn federal record. The trap was permanently set. The jaws were locked. Now all I had to do was leave the breadcrumbs for my sister to find and let the golden child tear her own husband to shreds. Mr. Carter snapped his heavy leather briefcase shut. The metallic click was loud in the suddenly empty room. That went exactly as you predicted, he murmured, keeping his voice low so the court reporter would not overhear. I simply nodded, standing up from my chair and smoothing down the front of my skirt. The hard part of the deposition was over, but the most devastating phase of my plan was just about to begin. I reached into my designer tote bag and pulled out a single unmarked manila folder. It was not particularly thick, but it carried enough explosive financial evidence to level a city block. I intentionally placed it near the center of the massive mahogany table, just close enough to the edge where Jasmine was sitting. I did not shove it toward her. I did not draw any attention to it. I simply set it down, grabbed my coat, and turned my back. Mr. Prescott was already rushing out the glass doors, shouting DeAndre's name down the hallway, completely abandoning his remaining 2 clients in his frantic haste to perform damage control. My mother was busy complaining about the exorbitant cost of downtown parking, aggressively adjusting her cashmere shawl while trying to maintain her composure. Jasmine was pouting, clearly annoyed that her husband had bolted and left her behind to carry her own bags. I walked out of the conference room with Mr. Carter. However, we did not head straight for the elevator bank at the end of the hall. Instead, I paused near the water cooler located just a few yards away. The conference room was constructed with modern floor-to-ceiling glass panels designed to let in natural light and project corporate transparency. That architectural choice also provided a perfect, unobstructed view of the interior from the hallway. I poured myself a small cup of water. I wanted to watch the exact moment the bomb detonated. Through the glass, I saw Jasmine notice the folder left on the table. Her eyes immediately locked onto it. Growing up, Jasmine never respected a single boundary I tried to set. She used to read my private diary, steal my clothes, and open my bank statements, always claiming that because we were family, she had an absolute right to know my business. My mother always defended her snooping, calling it natural sisterly curiosity, and punishing me if I ever complained about the invasion of privacy. I was banking entirely on that toxic entitlement right now. Jasmine looked around the room to make sure Mr. Prescott was actually gone. Then she reached across the polished wood and pulled the folder toward her. My mother leaned in close, equally eager to invade my privacy. They thought they were about to uncover my personal banking details. They thought they were going to find proof of my supposed miserable low-income life, so they could laugh about it on the ride back to the suburbs. Jasmine flipped the cover open. I had arranged the documents chronologically for maximum psychological impact. The first page was a certified corporate tax filing for DeAndre's so-called rapidly expanding logistics company. The gross revenue listed for the entire previous year was exactly $0. The business license had actually been suspended by the state 9 months ago for failure to pay basic franchise taxes. There were no fleet vehicles. There were no lucrative corporate accounts. The entire company was nothing more than a registered name on a piece of paper, a total fabrication used to make DeAndre look like a successful entrepreneur. As Jasmine turned the page, the real financial horror began. I had included 3 months of certified bank statements from their joint checking account, meticulously cross-referenced with DeAndre's secret offshore wire transfers. Through the glass, I watched Jasmine's brow furrow in deep confusion as she read the numbers. She was looking at hard, undeniable proof that the money she thought they were saving for their baby was being systematically drained. Tens of thousands of dollars had been wired directly to an online sports betting syndicate based in the Caribbean. The savings she had been boasting about at country club brunches had completely evaporated in late-night gambling binges. But losing money is one thing. Complete betrayal is another. I knew a narcissist like Jasmine could eventually forgive financial ruin as long as she could blame someone else for it. She would just expect my mother to bail them out again. She could not, however, forgive public humiliation and infidelity. The final document in the folder was a residential lease agreement for a luxury high-rise apartment located on the other side of the city. The monthly rent was an astonishing $4,000. It was signed and legally bound by DeAndre as the primary financial guarantor. But the tenant listed on the lease was not Jasmine. It was a 24-year-old cocktail waitress named Simone. Attached to the back of the lease were specific credit card receipts I had subpoenaed. There were charges from expensive lingerie boutiques, high-end downtown steakhouses, and weekend hotel getaways. All of the receipts were dated on the exact nights DeAndre had claimed he was working late at the warehouse to secure their family legacy. He was spending their grocery money on diamond tennis bracelets for another woman. I watched Jasmine through the soundproof glass. Her manicured fingers stopped tracing the lines of the lease agreement. Her entire body went completely rigid as if she had just been struck by lightning. The smug, entitled expression she had worn like a crown for the last 2 hours physically melted off her face. Her jaw dropped open. She looked like all the oxygen had just been violently sucked out of her lungs. My mother, noticing the sudden and terrifying shift in her golden child, snatched the papers out of Jasmine's hands to read them herself. Brenda's eyes darted rapidly across the lease agreement and the lingerie receipts. She brought a trembling hand up to her mouth, her cashmere shawl slipping entirely off her shoulder and falling onto the floor. The illusion she had fought so hard to protect was crumbling right in her hands. Jasmine stumbled backward, her chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Even through the thick glass partition, I could hear the muffled, high-pitched sound of her screaming. It was a primal sound of absolute devastation. She grabbed her heavy designer maternity bag and hurled it across the room with all her strength. It smashed into the mahogany table, spilling expensive makeup car keys and baby ultrasound photos everywhere. She started hyperventilating, clutching her chest, entirely unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Her perfect husband was a fraud. Her perfect marriage was a scam. The wealth she had been flaunting to her friends and social media followers was a complete illusion. DeAndre had not just squandered their savings, he had used the last of their credit to fund a double life with another woman, all while aggressively pushing his pregnant wife to forge a legal deed and steal our grandmother's house just to cover his tracks and pay his mistress's rent. I stood by the water cooler, calmly sipping from my small paper cup. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I did not feel the sisterly urge to run inside, hold her hand, and tell her everything was going to be okay. For years, she had watched my mother tear me down and had actively participated in my emotional destruction. She had laughed when my credit was ruined at 19. She had proudly presented a forged deed to throw me out on the street just weeks before Christmas. She had built her entire identity on being superior to me, treating my life like a stepping stone for her own ego. Now she had absolutely nothing. Her foundation was entirely built on sand and the tide had just rolled in. Mr. Carter stepped up beside me, following my gaze through the glass partition. He watched my mother desperately trying to hold a sobbing, thrashing Jasmine. He let out a low, impressed whistle. Remind me to never get on your bad side, Kiara, he said quietly, a hint of genuine awe in his voice. I crushed the paper cup in my hand and tossed it into the nearby trash bin. Let us go back to the office, Mr. Carter, I replied, turning away from the glass and walking toward the elevators. We still have a courtroom hearing to prepare for. And I have a very strong feeling the plaintiffs are going to be extremely distracted. I stepped off the elevator into the dimly lit cavernous space of the underground parking garage. Mr. Carter nodded to me, turning left toward his reserved parking spot, while I headed right toward my SUV. The air down there was heavy, smelling of exhaust fumes and damp concrete. Before I even reached my vehicle, the shrill, echoing sound of a woman screaming bounced off the cement walls. It was Jasmine. I paused, stepping into the deep shadow of a concrete pillar. About 50 yards away, bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of the garage, the final collapse of the golden child was unfolding in real time. Jasmine was standing next to DeAndre leased Porsche, waving the crumpled residential lease and the credit card receipts right in his face. Her designer maternity dress was disheveled. The perfectly curated image she had projected upstairs in the conference room was entirely gone. She was sobbing, her voice cracking, as she read the charges out loud. $4,000 a month for an apartment, she shrieked, hitting his chest with the papers. You told me the business was struggling because of the economy. You told me we had to cut back on the nursery budget. You have been buying diamond bracelets for a 24-year-old waitress while I am carrying your child. DeAndre looked like a trapped rat. He was pacing back and forth, holding his hands up in a defensive posture, constantly looking over his shoulder to see if anyone from the law firm was walking to their cars. He did not look apologetic. He looked annoyed that he had been caught and terrified of the public embarrassment. You need to calm down, Jasmine, he hissed, trying to grab the papers out of her hand. You are being hysterical. You are taking this entirely out of context. That apartment is a corporate lease for out-of-town clients. The jewelry was a client gift. You know I have to entertain investors. Do not lie to me, Jasmine screamed, stepping out of his reach. The lease has her name on it. I saw the hotel charges. You are sleeping with her. You drained our savings to play sugar daddy while we are completely broke. You made me forge a federal document to steal my grandmother's house just so you could pay your mistress. Just as DeAndre lunged forward to grab her wrist and silence her, the rapid, sharp click of high heels echoed across the pavement. My mother came marching out of the elevator bay, her cashmere shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She looked absolutely furious. Jasmine turned to her immediately. For her entire 32 years on this earth, Jasmine had run to our mother whenever she was hurt, inconvenienced, or upset. Brenda had always been her fierce protector, ready to coddle her, validate her feelings, and attack whoever had made her golden child cry. Jasmine held out her arms, tears streaming down her face, expecting Brenda to slap DeAndre across the face and drag her daughter away from this monster. "Mom, he is cheating on me," Jasmine sobbed, her voice breaking into a childish whimper. "He spent all our money on another woman. He is a complete fraud." My mother did not wrap her arms around Jasmine. She did not look at DeAndre with disgust. Instead, Brenda marched right up to Jasmine, grabbed her roughly by the upper arms, and gave her a sharp, violent shake. "Stop screaming this instant," my mother commanded, her voice a harsh, venomous whisper. "Do you want the entire building to hear you? Do you want the senior partners of this firm looking out their windows and seeing you acting like a crazy person in the parking lot?" Jasmine froze, her mouth falling open in sheer disbelief. "Mom, did you hear what I just said? He has a mistress. I do not care what he has." Brenda snapped, her eyes wide and manic. "I care about what is happening tomorrow morning. I care about the $4 million waiting for us in that courtroom. You think you are the first woman whose husband had a wandering eye? You think a few hotel receipts give you the right to throw a tantrum and jeopardize our entire family legacy?" I stood perfectly still in the shadows, watching the psychological destruction of my sister. My mother was doing to Jasmine exactly what she had done to me my entire life. She was invalidating her reality to protect her own selfish interests. She was gaslighting her own pregnant daughter in the middle of a parking garage just to maintain an illusion of control. Jasmine shook her head, tears ruining her expensive makeup. You want me to just ignore this? He spent our money. He is broke. He is your husband. Brenda fired back, her grip tightening on Jasmine's arms. And right now, he is the only chance we have at convincing that judge to give us the estate. If you walk away from him today, you walk away from $4 million. How are you going to pay for that baby, Jasmine? How are you going to maintain your lifestyle? You have no job. Your business has failed. If you leave him, you will have absolutely nothing. DeAndre, sensing that my mother was actually fighting his battle for him, quickly stepped up and stood right beside Brenda. He smoothed down his tie, his arrogant swagger slowly returning. Your mother is right, baby, DeAndre said smoothly, placing a hand on Jasmine's lower back. We are under a lot of financial stress right now. I made some stupid mistakes because of the pressure, but we are a team. We have to present a united front tomorrow. Kiara set us up. She planted that folder to tear us apart. Are you really going to let your bitter, jealous sister win? My mother pointed a manicured finger directly into Jasmine's face. Listen to me very carefully. If we walk into that courtroom tomorrow divided, the judge will hand every single penny to Kiara. She will laugh in our faces, she will go back to her perfect little corporate life, and we will be completely ruined. We cannot give her that satisfaction. I refuse to let that ungrateful girl beat me. The manipulation was breathtaking. They took DeAndre's massive infidelity, his gambling addiction, and his financial ruin and somehow magically turned it all into my fault. They weaponized Jasmine's hatred of me to force her to stay with a man who had completely destroyed her life. Jasmine looked back and forth between her mother and her husband. The fight slowly drained out of her body. Her shoulders slumped. The crushing realization that her mother cared more about defeating me and securing the estate money than she cared about her daughter's heartbreak was visibly breaking her spirit. She was completely trapped by her own dependence. She had never developed the strength to stand on her own 2 feet, so she had no choice but to lean on the 2 people who were currently manipulating her. Jasmine looked down at the concrete floor. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her movements slow and defeated. Fine, she whispered, her voice totally hollow. Good girl, my mother said, her tone instantly shifting back to fake, sickening sweetness. She patted Jasmine's cheek. Wipe your face. We are going to go home, have a nice dinner, and focus on the real enemy. Tomorrow morning, we walk into that courthouse as a strong, loving family. We tell the judge exactly what he needs to hear. We get that conservatorship, we get the estate, and then we will deal with this little marriage hiccup privately. DeAndre let out a heavy sigh of relief. He reached out and opened the passenger door of the Porsche for his wife. I will follow you both back to the house, Brenda, he said, playing the role of the respectful son-in-law. We need to go over our testimony for tomorrow. We have to make sure our stories line up perfectly so Kiara cannot trip us up again. Jasmine climbed into the low sports car, staring blankly out the windshield. She looked like a ghost. DeAndre shut the door, walked around to the driver's side and started the engine. My mother turned on her heel and marched toward her own luxury sedan, parked a few spaces away. I stayed in the shadows until their cars pulled out of the garage and merged into the busy downtown traffic. I unlocked my SUV and climbed inside. The silence of my car felt incredibly peaceful compared to the toxic chaos I had just witnessed. I started the engine feeling a profound sense of closure. I had spent my entire life wondering what it would be like to be the golden child, to be the one my mother loved and protected. But watching Jasmine shatter in that parking lot, I finally understood the truth. My mother did not love Jasmine any more than she loved me. She only loved what Jasmine represented. Jasmine was a prop, a tool used to project the image of a perfect family to the outside world. And the moment that prop became inconvenient, my mother was willing to sacrifice her daughter's sanity just to keep the performance going. They had just agreed to bury the infidelity and commit mass perjury tomorrow morning. They desperately needed Nana Pearl's $4 million to pay off DeAndre's massive defaults and maintain their country club facade. They truly believed that if they just lied loud enough and stood close enough together, they could bulldoze the legal system just like they bulldozed me at the Thanksgiving dinner table. I pulled out of the parking garage and drove toward my apartment, a cold, satisfied smile resting on my face. They were walking blindly into the slaughterhouse. They had no idea that while they were busy aligning their lies in the parking lot, my attorney was already filing the final devastating criminal referrals with the probate judge. Tomorrow was not going to be a hearing about a conservatorship. Tomorrow was going to be an execution. The heavy oak doors of the probate courtroom swung open, breaking the profound silence that had settled over the empty gallery. The 1-hour recess was officially over. I stood up from the wooden bench in the hallway and smoothed down the front of my tailored suit. Mr. Carter walked beside me, his leather briefcase swinging gently at his side. He did not say a word, but the slight, confident nod he gave me spoke volumes. The trap had been set over the last 6 months, and the spring was finally about to snap shut. We walked back down the center aisle and took our seats at the defendant's table. A few moments later, my family paraded back into the room. Paraded is the only word to describe it. My mother, Brenda, walked through the double doors as if she were entering a royal coronation. She had refreshed her makeup, reapplied her expensive lipstick, and adjusted her cashmere shawl so it draped perfectly across her shoulders. She looked completely relaxed, her chest puffed out with the absolute certainty of her impending victory. She did not even glance in my direction. In her mind, I was already a defeated, irrelevant obstacle that the legal system was about to sweep out of her way. Behind her walked Jasmine and DeAndre. If someone had not witnessed the absolute destruction of their marriage in the parking garage just 24 hours prior, they would have thought they were the perfect, loving couple. DeAndre had his hand resting protectively on the small of Jasmine's back. Jasmine was leaning into him, dabbing at the corners of her eyes with a fresh tissue, perfectly resuming her role as the fragile, pregnant victim. Watching them play their parts made my stomach turn, but it also validated every single action I was about to take. My mother had successfully gaslit her own daughter into staying with a lying, cheating fraud just to secure a payout. Jasmine had chosen the illusion of wealth over her own dignity. They had completely sold their souls for $4 million. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table. Mr. Prescott, their highly paid, aggressive attorney, was practically glowing. He rapidly organized his legal pads, uncapped his expensive fountain pen, and leaned over to whisper something to my mother. She smiled broadly and patted his arm. DeAndre leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest, shooting me that same arrogant smirk he had worn since the day of the funeral. They genuinely believed they had won. They thought the judge had taken the recess simply to review their forged quitclaim deed and draft the official order handing them the estate. They thought my thick manila folder was just a desperate collection of old family photos or emotional letters that carried absolutely no legal weight. The side door behind the bench suddenly clicked open. "All rise," the bailiff announced, his voice echoing loudly across the wood-paneled room. We all stood. Honorable Judge Harrison walked out of his private chambers. His heavy black robe swept across the floor. He did not look relaxed. He did not look like a man who was about to casually hand over a family fortune. His face was set in lines of absolute stone-cold fury. He was carrying my massive dossier in his hands. Judge Harrison took his seat at the elevated bench. He placed the heavy stack of documents down in front of him with a loud, resounding thud that made DeAndre physically flinch. The judge did not open his own legal pad. He did not look at the court reporter. He simply folded his hands together, resting them on top of my dossier, and let his eyes slowly pan across the plaintiff's table. The silence in the courtroom stretched out, becoming incredibly heavy and suffocating. It was not a peaceful silence. It was the terrifying quiet that happens right before a massive storm makes landfall. Mr. Prescott, eager to claim his victory and collect his massive legal fee, completely misread the room. He eagerly stepped up to his podium, buttoning his suit jacket. "Your Honor," Mr. Prescott began, his voice dripping with smooth, practiced confidence. Now that you have had the opportunity to review the materials, we respectfully request that the court move forward with granting the emergency conservatorship to my clients. As we have clearly established on the record, the respondent is completely unfit to manage these assets, and the legally binding quit-claim deed proves that the late Pearl Washington intended for the property to go to her rightful— Sit down, Mr. Prescott. Judge Harrison did not yell. He did not raise his voice. He delivered the command with a sharp cutting authority that sliced right through the lawyer's monologue like a razor blade. Mr. Prescott froze. His mouth hung open slightly. He blinked, clearly confused by the sudden hostility from the bench. Your Honor, I was simply summarizing. I said sit down, counselor. The judge repeated, his tone dropping to a dangerous, icy register. And I suggest you do not speak another word until you fully understand the absolute catastrophe you have dragged into my courtroom. Mr. Prescott slowly lowered himself back into his chair. The smug confidence completely evaporated from his face. He looked nervously at my mother, who had suddenly stopped smiling. Brenda gripped the edge of the mahogany table, her knuckles turning white. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, dropping her tissue into her lap. DeAndre uncrossed his arms, his posture instantly transforming from arrogant to highly defensive. The judge took a slow, deep breath. He picked up the very first page of my dossier. It was the executive summary my attorney had drafted, detailing the exact nature of the evidence enclosed. For the past hour, Judge Harrison began, his voice echoing clearly through the tense room. I have been sitting in my chambers reviewing the 400-page document submitted by the defense. I have read sworn affidavits, certified bank ledgers, forensic data traces, and federal security logs. And I must admit, in my 20 years presiding over this probate court, I have never seen a more brazen, reckless, and poorly executed attempt to defraud an estate. A collective gasp rippled through the plaintiff's table. My mother brought a trembling hand up to her throat. Jasmine's eyes darted frantically around the room. DeAndre leaned forward, his voice cracking slightly as he interrupted the judge. Your Honor, she made all of that up. Whatever she gave you is fake. Kiara is just a bitter, jealous bookkeeper trying to steal our money. Judge Harrison snapped his gaze directly onto DeAndre. The sheer intensity of the judge's glare made DeAndre instantly shrink back into his chair. Mr. DeAndre, Judge Harrison warned you are currently inches away from being held in criminal contempt of court. You testified under oath this morning that you are a highly successful business owner with no outstanding debts. You swore to this court that you possess the financial literacy required to manage a $4 million trust. The judge flipped to the second page of the dossier. He did not even look at DeAndre as he continued speaking. According to the certified corporate tax filings and the verified collection notices I am currently holding, your logistics company has generated zero revenue. You are actively defaulting on $500,000 in high-interest commercial loans. Your business license is suspended. You are a financial liability masquerading as an entrepreneur. Jasmine let out a sharp, involuntary whimper. My mother stared straight ahead, her face completely pale, the reality of the situation finally beginning to penetrate her massive ego. But that is a matter for the civil courts to sort out with your creditors. Judge Harrison continued, turning his attention to Mr. Prescott. What concerns this court, counselor, is the fact that you allowed your clients to submit Exhibit A into federal evidence. The judge pulled out the forged quit-claim deed. He held it up by the corner, looking at it with absolute disgust. You submitted a property deed that you claim was signed by the deceased 3 days before her passing. A deed that transfers a multi-million-dollar asset to your client. Did you personally verify the authenticity of this document, Mr. Prescott? Or did you simply take your desperate bankrupt clients at their word? Mr. Prescott stood up rapidly, his hands shaking so violently he knocked his own pen off the table. Your Honor, I was assured by my clients that the document was fully authenticated. It bears a certified notary stamp. I acted in good faith based on the evidence provided to me. Good faith? The judge scoffed loudly. The notary stamp belongs to a Darnell Jenkins, a man currently under investigation by the state tax board for fraudulent filing practices. Furthermore, the defense has provided time-stamped medical records proving that on November 2nd, the date this document was allegedly signed, Pearl Washington was completely incapacitated and physically incapable of holding a pen, let alone signing a binding legal contract. The judge dropped the deed back onto his desk. It landed with a soft final sound. "This is not a misunderstanding, Counselor," Judge Harrison stated, leaning forward over the bench. "This is federal wire fraud, elder abuse, and forgery. You have brought a criminal conspiracy into my courtroom, and you have attempted to use the legal system to execute a theft." The courtroom was completely paralyzed. The total destruction of their plan was happening so fast they could not even process it. My mother tried to speak, but only a dry, raspy sound came out of her mouth. DeAndre was staring at the floor, sweating profusely, realizing that he was not just losing the money, he was likely going to prison. Mr. Prescott was hyperventilating. He looked at me, then at my lawyer, and then back up to the judge. "Your Honor, my clients led me to believe the respondent was simply a low-level employee trying to take advantage of the situation. They swore to me she had no legal standing or financial background." Judge Harrison slowly took off his reading glasses. He looked at the sweating, terrified lawyer with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. He looked at my mother, whose face was completely drained of blood. Then he looked at DeAndre, who was visibly shaking. Finally, the judge asked the exact question that had been hanging over my family for the last 20 years. The question that would shatter their entire reality and reveal the absolute magnitude of the mistake they had just made. Counselor Judge Harrison asked softly, the silence in the room amplifying every single syllable. "Do you truly know who the respondent is?" Mr. Prescott opened his mouth to answer, but his vocal cords seemed to have paralyzed. He looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, and then looked back at the bench, shaking his head slowly. He had no answer, because he had never bothered to ask. Judge Harrison picked up the first page of my dossier and held it up for the entire courtroom to see. He read directly from the official federal letterhead. "The respondent, Kiara, is not a bookkeeper. She is the lead forensic auditor for a joint task force operated by the Internal Revenue Service and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. She specializes in tracing international wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and high-level financial crimes. You just brought a forged document and perjury committed on the public record into a courtroom against a woman who literally writes the training manuals on how to prosecute people exactly like your client." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that rings loudly in your ears. My mother physically collapsed back into her chair. Her mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The daughter she had spent 35 years belittling the woman she had mocked for living a modest life and driving a practical car was a top-tier federal investigator. Every single time she had called me stupid, every time she had told the extended family I was just a low-level clerk punching numbers into a calculator, I had been building a career dismantling criminal empires. Jasmine stared at me in absolute horror. She slowly moved her hands away from her pregnant belly and gripped the edge of the mahogany table as if the floor was dropping out from underneath her. The sister she thought she could bully and evict was suddenly standing over her with the power of the federal government. And DeAndre. DeAndre looked like a man who had just been handed a terminal diagnosis. All the blood had rushed out of his face, leaving his skin a sickly gray. He started shaking. His hands trembled so violently he had to press them flat against his thighs to stop the movement. The leased Porsche and the custom suits suddenly meant absolutely nothing. Judge Harrison was not finished. He tapped the thick stack of papers on his desk. "What you have handed me today, Mr. Prescott, is not a motion for a conservatorship. And what the respondent has submitted is not a defense. This 400-page dossier is a meticulously documented federal criminal referral. It contains a complete digital footprint of your client's illegal activities." The judge looked directly at DeAndre. His voice was like a whip cracking across the quiet room. "According to the cyber forensics logged in this file, Mr. DeAndre, You attempted to wire $1.2 million from an offshore trust account to an unregistered bank in the Cayman Islands exactly 5 days ago. You used a spoofed IP address that the respondent easily traced directly to the wireless router located inside your mother-in-law's guest house. You did not just try to steal a house, you attempted to drain the liquid assets of a protected estate. DeAndre swallowed hard. He looked around the courtroom desperately as if hoping to find an exit door he had somehow missed. He was completely trapped. But the financial crimes do not stop there. Judge Harrison continued relentlessly. This dossier details how your so-called logistics company is nothing more than a shell corporation. You have been funneling your wife's savings and high-interest commercial loans through this fake business to pay off massive offshore gambling debts. You have engaged in systematic money laundering. And to cover your tracks, you pressured your pregnant wife into forging a legal quitclaim deed, which you then had notarized by an associate who is already under federal investigation for tax fraud. Mr. Prescott dropped his face into his hands. He was visualizing his own law license catching fire and burning to ash. He had aggressively deposed a federal agent and submitted a forged document on behalf of a money launderer. His career was effectively over. "Your Honor," Mr. Prescott pleaded weakly, his voice muffled by his hands. "I had absolutely no knowledge of these activities. I was lied to. I formally request to withdraw as counsel for the plaintiffs immediately." "You can file your withdrawal paperwork with the clerk, counselor," Judge Harrison snapped. "But you are not leaving this room until we address the final piece of evidence." The judge turned his attention back to me. For the first time all morning, his expression softened into a look of profound professional respect. "The respondent has provided irrefutable proof that she is the only person legally fit to manage this estate," the judge stated clearly. "She protected these assets with military-grade security protocols. But there is one detail in this file that I find particularly fascinating." Judge Harrison looked back at DeAndre. "During your deposition this morning, you were asked if you had any business dealings with a private equity firm called Apex Holdings. You stated under oath that you did not. You perjured yourself because you owe that specific firm over $500,000 in defaulted loans." DeAndre closed his eyes. Tears of pure panic were leaking out of the corners. He nodded slowly, too terrified to speak. "What you clearly did not realize," the judge said, leaning forward over the bench, "is the ownership structure of that private equity firm." The judge paused, letting the suspense hang in the heavy courtroom air. Then he delivered the final fatal blow. Apex Holdings is a private debt management portfolio secretly owned and operated by a trust. And the sole manager of that trust is the respondent, Kiara. The courtroom seemed to violently tilt on its axis. My mother gasped loudly, a harsh, jagged sound that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Jasmine let out a high-pitched sob, burying her face in her hands. DeAndre snapped his eyes open and stared at me. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. I was not just the sister-in-law he had tried to intimidate. I was not just the woman he had tried to evict. I was his absolute financial master. I finally broke my silence. I stood up from the defendant's table, buttoned my suit jacket, and looked directly into DeAndre's terrified eyes. My voice was calm, clear, and utterly devoid of mercy. "When you started taking out predatory loans to fund your gambling addiction and your mistress's apartment, I bought your debt," I explained slowly, making sure every single word landed with maximum impact. "I bought it through my private equity firm for pennies on the dollar. I own the lease on your warehouse. I own the title loan on your leased Porsche. I literally own your financial existence, DeAndre." He shook his head frantically, completely broken. "Kiara, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic whine. "We are family. You cannot do this. I will pay it back. I swear I will pay it back." I smiled, a cold, razor-sharp smile. "You owe me $500,000, I stated plainly. "And because you just committed perjury and submitted a forged document to this court, your loans are now in permanent default. If you breathe wrong, if you ever contact me again, if you ever step foot near my property, I will legally bankrupt you. I will seize every single asset you possess, down to the designer shoes on your feet. You tried to play a game of corporate warfare with a woman who builds the battlefields. And you lost. My mother stood up on shaking legs. She reached her hand out toward me. Her face was a mask of absolute horror and desperate pleading. "Kiara, my baby." She cried, her voice trembling with the realization that she had bet on the wrong horse her entire life. "Please. We did not know. Jasmine is pregnant. You cannot destroy your sister's life like this. You have to forgive us." I looked at the woman who had stolen my identity at 19. The woman who had watched me sit in the back of a church at my grandmother's funeral while she played the grieving daughter. The woman who had just yesterday told her own pregnant child to stay with a cheating money launderer just to secure a payday. "I do not have to do anything," I replied, my voice echoing coldly across the room. "You chose this path. You chose to treat me like an ATM. You chose to try and steal a dying woman's legacy. You dug this grave with your own greed. Now you get to lie in it." Judge Harrison slammed his gavel down. The sharp crack made my family jump in their skin. "The motion for an emergency conservatorship is entirely denied," the judge announced, his voice booming with absolute finality. "The estate of Pearl Washington remains under the sole executive control of the respondent." The judge gathered the thick dossier and handed it to the bailiff standing next to his bench. Furthermore, Judge Harrison continued glaring down at my family. "I am officially forwarding this entire criminal referral to the district attorney's office and the federal prosecutor's desk. Mr. DeAndre, you are not leaving this courthouse today as a free man." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom suddenly opened. Two uniformed county sheriff's deputies stepped inside, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts. They walked straight down the center aisle, their boots thudding loudly against the carpet. My mother screamed. Jasmine collapsed against the table, sobbing hysterically as her entire world completely disintegrated in front of her eyes. The consequences of their toxic, arrogant behavior had finally arrived, and there was absolutely nowhere left to hide. The deputies moved with striking purpose. Their heavy black boots thudded against the carpet, closing the distance between the heavy oak doors and the plaintiff's table in seconds. DeAndre stumbled backward, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He bumped into the wooden divider, trapping himself in the corner of the room. DeAndre Washington, the taller deputy, barked, his voice echoing in the stunned silence of the room. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back. You are being taken into custody." DeAndre raised his hands, shaking his head frantically. Wait. There is a misunderstanding. I did not do anything. My lawyer will explain." He looked desperately at Mr. Prescott, but the attorney had already retreated to the far corner of the room, stuffing his legal pads into his briefcase and aggressively pretending he did not know the man he had just spent 2 hours defending. "Turn around," the deputy commanded again, this time, placing a heavy hand on DeAndre's shoulder and physically spinning him toward the table. The metallic ratcheting sound of the handcuffs clicking into place was the loudest thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of complete and utter accountability. Jasmine shrieked. It was not her usual theatrical cry designed to garner sympathy from an audience. It was a visceral, raw sound of sheer panic. She lunged forward, grabbing DeAndre's sleeve as the deputies began pulling him away. "Where are you taking him? You cannot take him. We have a baby. He is a business owner." The second deputy gently but firmly pushed Jasmine back. "Ma'am, step away. He is being arrested on multiple outstanding warrants for federal wire fraud, and we have an immediate detainer from the state tax board." Jasmine collapsed back against the table, her hands clutching her designer maternity dress. Her perfect world was completely gone. In less than 24 hours, she had learned her husband was a cheating fraud, her bank accounts were empty, and the legal deed she forged was about to land her in a criminal investigation of her own. The 30-day eviction notice I had handed her on Thanksgiving was no longer a threat. It was an incoming reality. She was going to be a single mother with absolutely no money, no home, and a husband sitting in a federal penitentiary. She turned to our mother, her eyes wide with terror. "Mom, do something. Call someone. Fix this." But Brenda was paralyzed. The woman who had spent my entire life controlling the narrative, manipulating our extended family, and projecting an image of country club superiority had absolutely nothing left in her arsenal. The flying monkeys were gone. The fake wealth was gone. The golden child was ruined. Brenda's eyes darted around the room, landing on the judge who was already walking out through his private chambers, then on the disappearing deputies, dragging a crying DeAndre out the side door, and finally they landed on me. I was standing calmly beside the defendant's table, sliding my tablet back into my leather tote bag. I looked completely unbothered, standing in the absolute wreckage of their lives. A profound shift occurred in my mother's eyes. The arrogant, condescending matriarch vanished, replaced instantly by a desperate, terrified woman who suddenly realized that the daughter she had abused for decades was now the most powerful person in her universe. I held the keys to the $4 million estate. I controlled the massive debt that was about to crush her golden child. I was the only life raft left in the freezing water. Brenda scrambled out from behind the table. She ran across the short distance separating us and grabbed my arm. Her grip was tight, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the sleeve of my suit. Real tears were streaming down her face, ruining her expensive makeup and leaving dark streaks down her cheeks. "Kiara, please," she begged, her voice cracking, her breathing ragged and shallow. "Please, you have to stop this. Tell the judge you will drop the charges. Tell the police it was a misunderstanding. You have to pay DeAndre's bail. You have to let Jasmine stay in the guest house. She has nowhere else to go." "Kiara, look at me." I did not pull away immediately. I stood perfectly still and looked down at her hands clutching my arm. Then I looked up into her tear-stained face. "We are family," Brenda sobbed, her voice echoing in the empty courtroom. "You are my daughter. You cannot let your own family fall apart like this. Please, I am begging you, help us." I felt a strange, profound sense of peace wash over me. For 35 years, I had craved her validation. I had worked 3 jobs to fix the credit she ruined, just hoping she would tell me she was proud. I had sat by my grandmother's hospital bed, hoping my mother would show up and finally act like a parent. I had endured her insults, her gaslighting, and her cruelty, all because society tells us that family is sacred and blood is thicker than water. But staring at her now, I realized that blood means absolutely nothing when it is poisoned. I slowly and deliberately reached over, clamped my hand around her wrist, and physically peeled her fingers off my arm. I took one step back, establishing a hard, impenetrable boundary. "You only remember that I am your daughter when you need a bailout," I said, my voice completely steady and cold as ice. "When you ruined my credit at 19, you told me I owed you. When you threw me to the back of the church at Nana's funeral, I was invisible. When you stood in that study and told me I was a bitter, jealous spinster who deserved nothing, you made it very clear who your real family was." Brenda shook her head frantically. "I was angry. I made a mistake. I am sorry, Kiara. I am so sorry." "You are not sorry," I corrected her, keeping my tone perfectly level. "You are just out of options. You backed a losing horse and now you want me to pay your gambling debts. But the bank is officially closed." Jasmine let out another wail from the other side of the room, crying out for her husband. My mother flinched at the sound, looking back at me with absolute desperation. "What are we supposed to do?" she whispered. "I suggest you help Jasmine start packing," I replied smoothly. "The sheriff will be at the guest house on the 26th to enforce the eviction, and you should probably call Auntie Denise to see if she will loan you the money for DeAndre's criminal defense attorney, though I highly doubt she will answer your calls." Brenda's mouth fell open. The realization that I was entirely immune to her emotional manipulation finally set in. She had no power here. She had no leverage. She had lost completely. I picked up my leather tote bag and secured the strap over my shoulder. I looked at her one last time. "Nana gave me the estate because I am the only one who actually loved her. Not her wallet," I stated, delivering the absolute truth she had been running from. You aren't my family, you are just a bad investment I am finally liquidating. I turned my back on her. I did not look at Jasmine weeping at the table. I did not look at the frantic lawyer. I walked down the center aisle of the courtroom, my heels clicking sharply against the floor, matching the steady, powerful rhythm of my own heartbeat. Mr. Carter walked beside me, opening the heavy oak doors. We stepped out into the hallway, leaving the sound of my mother's sobbing trapped inside that room forever. We rode the elevator down to the lobby in comfortable silence. As we reached the ground floor, Mr. Carter turned to me and extended his hand. It has been an absolute pleasure representing you, Kiara. You executed that flawlessly. I shook his hand firmly. Thank you for your help, Mr. Carter. I will review the final estate documents on Monday. I walked out of the heavy glass doors of the courthouse and stepped into the bright, blinding sunlight of the afternoon. The city air felt crisp and incredibly clean. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with a sense of freedom I had never experienced before. The massive weight I had been carrying on my shoulders for my entire life was completely gone. I walked across the plaza and unlocked my sleek black SUV. As I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, my phone buzzed in my bag. It was an email notification from a prestigious real estate firm. They had officially accepted my listing for the $4 million estate. I was going to sell the property, secure the capital, and use the funds to expand my own financial firm. I was building my own legacy now on my own terms, free from the toxic anchors that had tried to drag me down. I put the car in drive and pulled out into the busy street, merging seamlessly with the flow of traffic. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was absolutely nothing behind me worth looking at anymore. The work of healing from a toxic family is never entirely finished. There will always be moments of grief for the family I deserved, but never had. But as I drive forward into my new life, I know that true freedom comes from recognizing your own worth and refusing to let anyone discount it. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic family members to protect your own peace and future? How did you find the strength to enforce your boundaries? I would love to read your stories and experiences in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more authentic stories of resilience, justice, and personal growth. Share this video with someone who might be struggling with manipulative relatives and needs a reminder that it is perfectly okay to walk away. Thank you for being part of my journey. Remember, your family of origin does not dictate your destiny. You have the power to liquidate bad investments and build a life that is entirely unapologetically yours.